Hey, thanks for clicking on the video. Today we're checking out the one Titan build we've been asking for since Tiny Hammer was released 7 years ago. Now, while you've definitely seen this build's exotic in use due to some recently released weapons, it can now be optimized and be the best that it can be, ready to tackle your power grind, your conquests, and whatever mythic Kepler activities you might find yourself in. So with that said, as usual, there are timestamps and a dim link down below for your convenience. And if you enjoy this content, you like my builds and other informative D2 videos, a subscription would be greatly appreciated. And moving directly into our build, we're going to look at our exotic armor piece first. Of course, the one we run is Mela's Panoplia, the exotic arms. This exotic reads, collecting a fire sprite or rapid solar final blows make you a forged master, allowing you to recall your throwing hammer. After impacting a target, recall your hammer at full intensity, perform a perfect recall, causing an explosion of forged slag. Perfect recalls and collecting fire sprites extend your time as a forged master. So there is a good bit that goes on here. First up is activating the exotic. This can be done, like the description said, by picking up a fire sprite. There are numerous ways to get these, but in our case, we defeat a scorched enemy. But you'll see, when we pick up that fire sprite, we get the Forge Master buff with no timer. The other way to get Forge Master is by scoring 3 solar kills, be it from abilities or weapons. Now again, you'll see the buff has no duration, and this is due to the fact that we get to choose when we want to actually consume it. And we do that by just throwing our hammer. Once thrown, our Forge Master buff will begin to count down with an 11-second timer. While this buff is active, we can do a good bit, but the basis is that we get to recall our hammer. We can't recall it whenever though. It needs to hit something, it's an enemy, a wall, it just needs to bounce once. And we can see that actually happening as it flies through the air. Our melee looks the same, but then once it bounces, we get the new melee icon, which upon clicking your melee button, you don't actually need to hold it, which I thought we did, but you don't, you will recall that hammer. Also, the hammer does physically fly through the world and does deal damage to anything that it hits while returning to you. Now, the next bit about throwing and recalling our hammer comes from the perfect recall, which is a necessary mechanic to make this build actually very good. Whenever we throw our hammer and hit an enemy, the hammer bounces upwards and will produce a sweet spot timing in which we want to actually activate the recall. The sweet spot can be seen as a flash on the hammer itself, or as a clanking sound as if striking a hammer on an anvil. See if you can hear it here. Now, recalling our hammer too early or too late will simply bring the hammer back to us, but getting the perfect recall is extremely beneficial. For one, it extends our Forge Master timer. This allows us to truly spam our hammer and recall without needing to worry about our buff running out. Perfect recalls also add a secondary explosion to our hammer. In this clip against the firing range ogre, we can see that we're dealing 417 on the impact and 224 on the explosion. This is an effective 53% buff to the damage of this ability. But maybe the best thing about the explosion is that it's an explosion. This means our tiny hammer, which historically has only ever been able to reliably deal damage to single targets at a time, can now be used to clear waves of adds. And yes, this second explosion is increased by melee damage scalars, such as 1-2 punch, but more on that later. Now, coming out of our exotic armor piece, we usually take a look at an exotic weapon, but that isn't the case here. We do have some very desirable legendary weapons, which I just alluded to, but they aren't totally necessary. Rather, we're going to jump straight into our subclass, starting with our super. Solar Titan doesn't have incredible options, but Burning Maul is my go-to just because I believe it to be the better boss damage super and something you can use to take care of champs or mini bosses in portal activities. For our class ability, I run Rally Barricade. I tend not to use this much, but in a pinch we can drop it to get some splash damage resist, which is, it's alright I guess. For our melee, it is of course the throwing hammer. I don't think I really need to explain much here. And then our grenade can be anything, but I like Thermite Grenade for its high damage and its ability to scorch easily. Now, moving on from our abilities, we have our aspects, and the first and most important one is Roaring Flames. This aspect states that solar ability final blows increase solar ability damage up to 3 times. And we can clearly see this in game. Our base melee and throw 1 deals 368 damage. Throw 2 deals 613, throw 3 deals 858, and Throw 4 with max stacks of Roaring Flames deals 1,103 damage for the max damage increase of plus 200%. Also do note that any solar ability kills refresh the timer completely, making this buff super easy to keep active. And yes, this ability damage increase applies to every piece of our perfect throw, that being the impact, explosion, and recall damage. Now back in our subclass, our second aspect is one that will help us with survivability, that being Sol Invictus. This aspect will spawn sunspots when defeating scorched enemies or when getting kills with abilities. As for what sunspots do, it says it makes our abilities come back faster, reduces super drain, scorches enemies, and gives us restoration when entering them. We can see this in-game pretty clearly. Upon getting a melee kill, the sunspot spawns in, and then when in the sunspot, we get the Sol Invictus as a buff, and it applies restoration to us. And there is no cooldown on sunspots, with sunspots even being able to spawn other sunspots themselves. But these are effectively just pools of health and ability regen that we will be leveraging to stay alive in even the most difficult content. But now looking at our fragments, first we have Ember of Searing. This causes scorched enemies to drop fire sprites on death. This means every ability minus Throwing Hammer spawns them. The Ember of Torches, so our Throwing Hammer gives us Radiant. Ember of Solace, so our Radiant and Restoration effects last longer. And then Ember of Empyrean, so that any solar kills extend Restoration and Radiant. This means we should always be running around with some passive health regen and a 20% damage buff to our weapons. Now moving on from our subclass, I want to talk about the weapons we should pair with this build. Chiefly, I highly recommend a Spreadshot hand cannon with 1-2 punch. If you have the Phonutria Farah from Arms Week, I think that works best because it's solar, but you can also get the Trials one Aureus Neutralizer. Both of these infinite ammo primaries get access to 1-2 punch, which is a perk that on these weapons will increase our melee damage by 75%. And we can see this pairing in action as by stacking everything so far, our initial impact deals 1,500 damage. And with the perfect recall also getting buffed by 1-2 punch, that's like 2,200 damage per hammer. By default, our hammer is dealing 417. That's about a 400% increase across the whole build. And where other builds might be restricting your special weapon, this does not. Now, for our other weapon picks, we get to use either Tenacious Mastery or Mint Retrograde in our kinetic, and if you use Aureus Neutralizer, you could run Lord of Wolves or Choir of One. Your heavy can be whatever. I'm always on an Eager Edge sword. Now moving into our armor, the stat spread you want is a maximum melee for the only source of multiplicative melee damage increase in the game, which if you have 200 stat, that's going to be plus 30%. But even not hitting 200 is okay, you still just want some kind of increase. Next up is 100 super for a maximum uptime on that ability, and then an even spread between health and grenade to boost a bit of the remainder of our kit. Class and weapons are pretty negligible in this build. Then for our armor mods, we run a Solar Siphon for orbs from our solar weapon, and a hands-on for super gen from melee kills. On our arms, we run double heavy-handed, which will cause our hammer to pretty much print orbs. Chest is going to be for some resist, and a solar ammo generation just to upkeep our special ammo weapon of choice. Legs is a better already for some redundancy on health regen when picking up orbs, an innervation for some grenade back when picking up orbs, and a strand scavenger, again to help with the upkeep on our special weapon. And our class item is a special finisher for more special ammo, powerful attraction, so when we do rarely pop our barricade, we suck up some orbs nearby, and then a proximity ward to become truly invincible when doing finishers. And then the last bit before our gameplay loop is the artifact. The first one that comes up is Fever and Chill, which will allow us to get Radiant simply for hitting crits with our solar weapons. Then we run Cauterized Darkness, which will cause dark debuffed enemies to take more solar damage. Great in the cases where you run Tenacious Mastery or a perk like Slice on Mint Retrograde. And then the last important one is Radiant Shrapnel, which causes all weapon damage to produce tracking solar projectiles whenever we are radiant, which is all of the time. This perk is actually surprisingly potent and can help a lot with ad clear when you're just using your solar weapons. And now to end us off, we have the gameplay loop. We begin everything by trying to get a fire sprite. This is done easiest by scorching something and then killing it. Thermite grenades scorches, sunspots scorch, our base melee will scorch when we have roaring flames. Usually it just takes our first kill to spawn the first sprite. Once this happens, we can now throw and recall our hammer at will. Using this to clear ads is a good choice as each kill is increasing our damage output just make sure to be always getting the perfect recalls to extend that Forge Master timer. Once you've done it enough, it literally becomes second nature though, so don't worry about it too much. But as you're throwing your hammer and catching it, sunspots are spawning alongside orbs. Use both of these as sources of health regen and ability jumpstarting. But as you proc Restoration and Radiant, our fragments will be extending those timers on every hammer or solar kill in general. When high health enemies show up, make sure to use 1-2 punch on both hits of the hammer and you'll wreck whatever you're against. But yeah, for fodder, you don't really need to activate 1-2 punch unless you're in super high level content. When necessary, do swap and use your special weapon. Usually this will be the go-to against bosses that don't allow you to kill adds to keep Roaring Flames stacked up. If you do ever drop Forge Master or Roaring Flames, remember it takes at most 3 solar kills to begin again and reach max stacks. And do try to use your super and the rest of your kit, because I'll be honest, throwing and recalling your hammer is just addicting. The fact that it does mostly everything too, from ad clear to taking out high health enemies, is just sublime, but you also don't want to forget that you have the rest of your build. And yeah, it's kind of just awesome. This build is competitive with some of the better ones in the game, and it is truly just the most fun I've had in a long time. And with that, thank you for getting this far into the video. Your viewership is greatly appreciated. Remember, there is a dim link in the description. That way you can take this build really easily. Also, if you want to support me, support the channel, a like, a comment, a subscription goes a very long way. If you want to support me and support the channel, but you can't think of a comment down below, Mjolnir. And with that, as usual, I hope you are having a great day, and I hope to see you around.